Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Entertaining Series. Who's Nintendo suing this week and why are they suing them when we have some really important follow-ups to the Palworld lawsuit? Because a couple months ago I talked about the fact that Nintendo was filing patent infringement suits against Pocket Pair, the parent company of Palworld, based upon throwing what would amount to be a Pokeball into a virtual field and how it would interact things in front of it. And you guys all talked about just how vague the patents were. It could be a grenade in Call of Duty, it could be a football in Madden, it could be a basketball in any sort of NBA game. And of course Nintendo is still pursuing this matter, and even though it doesn't seem like they have a very strong case in Japan, they are now extending it to the United States of America, trying to get some of the same patents here that they have in Japan so they could launch a multi-country lawsuit front. And that is just because, again, Palworld is definitely eating a little bit of Nintendo's lunch right now. They have a successful game that is in the same genre as something like Pokemon, and while there are no sort of copyright issues as far as the visuals or monster design, or else Nintendo would have already sued, they are still looking for any inroads to be able to try to kill Palworld as best as they can, because they don't want a competitor out there thinking that they can do whatever they want. Nintendo filed this lawsuit September 18, 2024, and while it hasn't seen a court yet and probably won't for some time, they're definitely now patent shopping around the world, trying to get more paperwork submitted into patent offices and granted so that they can launch these same suits in different regions. Because remember, patents are basically geographically locked. If you have a patent for something in Japan, you have to seek a patent for it in some place like the United States, which is exactly what Nintendo is doing. They've received another version of a patent in the US that would basically allow them to potentially, if they want to, sue Pocket Pair and Palworld in the United States. And remember, because Palworld got delayed in Japan with basically almost an injunction, this is something that Nintendo might be seeking in one of Palworld's biggest territories as far as gamers are concerned. If they can get a lawsuit going in the US and get some friendly court to issue an injunction that Palworld couldn't be sold until this thing was sorted out, it would absolutely destroy that company's bottom line. Because if you think about one of the biggest gaming locations in the world where a lot of money changes hands, you're talking about the United States. So it seems like Nintendo is trying to issue a little bit more pain to Pocket Pair in one of their largest regions, and I will get into the specifics of what this new patent means in the US, but first I want to go over some of the top line stuff just to catch you back up, because again, since the beginning, we talked about the fact that these patents are extremely vague and tenuous at best, and honestly, I really don't think they would hold up in any sort of court outside of Japan, because what they're actually patenting here is so loosely tied to any sort of gameplay mechanic that basically 100 different games could be considered to be infringing on what Nintendo's saying here, basically just throwing an object into the game world and infecting another object in front of it. Again, if you throw a pass in Madden and it is caught, that affects the game world in front of it. If you throw a grenade in Call of Duty and explodes some enemy characters, you've thrown something into the game world and affected what is in front of it. So really, you could think of any sort of gameplay mechanic going back to the early 80s and you would find it there. But Nintendo has acquired one new patent that could be used against Palworld, but the funny part is, of the 23 patents they submitted to the US Patent Office, 22 were outright rejected, so Nintendo did not have a good day, but they did get one patent by, and they actually changed some of the language here, where field character has been replaced by virtual character, and catching items has been replaced with obtaining items, and also a display for likelihood of success. Well, think of some sports games, they will give you some percentages of what they think is going to happen next, and that is absolutely just wild, because again, you could kind of translate this to any gameplay mechanic out there and basically find a match. Sure, players in Palworld were throwing an object into the world, affecting things in front of it, and it definitely seems Pokemon-esque, but is that how vague these patents can truly be? Throwing an object in front of you and catching something? I believe that would mean pretty much every Ghostbusters game out there, when you actually catch the ghost, would also be qualifying for Nintendo to go and sue. And again, this is why I'm driving the point home. This isn't Nintendo going after a company because they think that they're infringing on their patents and they're upset because someone stole this very dynamic gameplay mechanic. It's going after another company that is basically taking money out of Nintendo's bottom line by outcompeting them in a genre that Nintendo is known for. And again, all of this is just so incredibly vague. It is a little bit ridiculous, but they were granted that patent on February 11, 2025. And if you see here, when we scroll through the patent, you're going to see some of the same diagrams and images I showed you in a previous video. And it's just so wild to think Nintendo is really truly doing this. They waited for Palworld to release, they waited to find something, and they decided to launch that suit in Japan, and now they're basically trying to apply for the patents, at least now in the US, and have been granted one so they can basically expand that lawsuit field, because it's one of those things they have to just basically prove that Palworld is infringing. But in a previous video we talked about the fact that there was an 8-year-old GTA 5 mod which predated everything Nintendo had done before that shows the exact same mechanic. Now there is the issue of prior art. When you're getting a patent, you do need to look to make sure it's not already been done before, and while the Grand Theft Auto 5 Pokemon Go Edition mod might not be the strongest way to point to the fact that Nintendo was not novel in their concept for the patent, it does give them a little bit more of an inroads. But any good lawyer is going to find another 30 examples of games that have the same gameplay mechanic in it and present it to a court if it goes that far, showing that Nintendo shouldn't have been granted the patent in the first place because it has already been done a ton of times. So leave me a comment down below. Just list a game where you throw something in front of you and affect the game world. I can't wait to hear all of the hilarious different answers, because you could basically name 50% of video games that have ever existed, and that's exactly what would happen. And I do love just watching these absolutely corrupted Pokemon run around the world of Grand Theft Auto 5. It's such a hilarious thing to see, but it is an example of where you can point to things that have occurred before patents were granted and say, no, this shouldn't be patentable because it already existed in the world and it's not a novel concept. But again, the person that made this mod would be infringing on a lot of Nintendo properties anyway, so that's why I say it's not exactly a perfect example, but it is an example, and it's me trying to explain to you how these things actually work, because again, not a lawyer but did teach college classes in entertainment business law, a lot of copyright, a lot of patent, a lot of things such as that, and in my background at previous work jobs, I dealt with a lot of patent filings when we had actual manufacturer goods, when we would actually be developing certain things. So it is an area that I do have a lot of experience in, but again, I always tell you I am not a lawyer. I am a filmmaker who makes retro gaming videos on YouTube. But you'll see here that they did receive that patent, and they're asking for an interview to obtain another patent, basically trying to argue their case. And this all has to do, again, with the same patents in Japan. They're basically just variations thereof. There's usually a parent patent and children patents, and if Nintendo gets that umbrella patent, they can go after pretty much anything they want. And again, even if it is completely vague, and I really believe in the US this thing would lose at face value, and they can cause Pocket Pair a lot of trouble in having to just spend to defend this. If you're trying to defend lawsuits in multiple different countries, you need legal teams in multiple different countries that are bar admitted to the state where they are going to be arguing and understand all of the laws. And I'm pretty sure if Palworld had never been as successful as it was, selling 30, 40, 50 million copies and doing in the billions of revenue, and Sony hadn't gotten involved in a partnership with them, then Nintendo wouldn't care about this whatsoever, because they know it is just one of those situations where what they're describing is so incredibly vague, you could basically say it's any sort of game out there. But that's exactly what Nintendo is doing right now, and I bet in maybe a month or two you'll see that they're also doing it in some places in Europe. They're going to go and pick the biggest gaming markets out there and try to get the same patent issued in all of them, so that they then have standing to try to bring a patent case against Pocket Pair. It's basically death by 1,000 paper cuts. They're going to try to inflict a little bit of damage in a lot of different places, run up the bill, and maybe then Palworld will change their gameplay mechanic completely and Nintendo will feel like they won, which is absolutely unfair. This is just bullying behavior using the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. Nintendo's trying to either interrupt, delay, or otherwise stop Palworld, and you already saw in a previous video, or maybe you read news articles, that the Japanese release of Palworld is already delayed on PlayStation 5. Now, if they can get some idiot judge in North America to issue them an injunction against the sale of Palworld until the case is settled, that would be disastrous. But honestly, injunctions rarely are ever granted. It has to be pretty egregious for a judge to say something like that. I believe only recently that Apple got one injunction in a certain territory over patent infringement, and that was incredibly blatant. And as far as the patents that Nintendo has been issued are concerned, there's one that would not even really be relevant to Palworld, but you could probably think of a lot of games that do it. The smooth switching of riding objects. Now think of any video game when you're on a vehicle, on an animal, and you're able to smoothly switch to another one. I can think of 4 or 5 examples off the top of my head, and Grand Theft Auto would definitely pop into there as well. But tell me down below, what's a game where you can switch one mode of transportation to the other seamlessly? I'm pretty sure you guys could think of a ton. But again, this really has nothing to do with throwing a ball into a virtual space or how you mount objects in a game. It has everything to do with the fact that Nintendo, one of the biggest gaming companies in the world, is upset that an upstart basically beat them at their own genre, because right now Palworld definitely is more popular than Pokemon as far as current games are concerned. Nintendo shouldn't be suing people for patent infringement, it should be innovating on its own properties, making new exciting games in the Pokemon world so that fans are given what they want and go back to being a Nintendo customer versus a Pocket Pair customer. But in the absence of being able to 100% compete, they're going to try to beat their opponents in a courtroom, and that just really feels straight up greasy in my opinion. It makes Nintendo look terrible, and honestly lately that's all Nintendo has been able to do is make more people realize that they might be a family-friendly gaming company that makes cute characters, but on the business side of things they will absolutely just pipe you in the kneecap and leave you for dead in an alley. If you have any questions, leave them down below, but that's the update, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.